One bold claim recently echoed online: America will regret re-electing Donald Trump. It's a sentiment shared by everyone from political analysts to everyday citizens. But is there any truth to this warning? Will Trump's second term bring economic chaos, deeper divisions, and foreign policy disasters? Or will it mark a turning point for national strength and prosperity, as his supporters believe? In this video, we explore the real potential consequences of Trump's return to the White House, unpacking policy changes, global reactions, and the challenges America faces. Let's dive in. America's future, triumph or trouble? Donald Trump's done it again. On November 5, 2024, he stormed back into the White House, defying the odds and igniting a firestorm of hope and fury. His fans hail it as America's big comeback, a middle finger to the elites and a return to the good old days. But here's the question buzzing in every diner and living room. Will we regret handing him the keys again? Will history cheer this as a bold win, or wince at a nation unraveled? Let's dive in and figure out what's at stake for your job, your block, and your future. A divided nation. Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2025 was met with celebration in some corners of the country and outright defiance in others. His supporters see it as a victory for real America, a correction to what they believe was a stolen 2020 election and a rejection of progressive policies they felt were ruining the nation. His critics, on the other hand, view it as a dark turn, proof that democracy itself is under threat and that the country is sliding further into division. This divide isn't new, but is it worse than ever? The United States has weathered internal conflicts before: the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War protests, and even the deep polarization of the Obama and Trump years. But what makes 2025 different is the complete erosion of trust in institutions. Faith in the media, the Supreme Court, the FBI, and even the electoral process is at an all-time low. Both sides believe the system is rigged against them, and when people stop believing in the legitimacy of their government, what happens next? In Trump's America, red states are doubling down. Governors in Texas and Florida are pushing laws that align with Trump's agenda, from stricter immigration crackdowns to bans on diversity programs in schools. Blue states, meanwhile, are openly resisting. California and New York are enacting policies directly opposing Trump's federal mandates. Legal battles are piling up. The country is no longer just politically divided, it's operating under two conflicting visions of governance. And the streets reflect that. Protests are widespread, with demonstrations against Trump's policies clashing with counter-protests in his favor. Social media is a battleground where both sides trade accusations, further fueling the divide. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, some claiming Trump is setting the stage for authoritarian rule, others insisting the deep state is still working against him. Then there's the question of violence. We've already seen isolated incidents, clashes between activists, reports of political intimidation, and an uptick in threats against public officials. The FBI warns that political extremism, both right and left-wing, is on the rise. If tensions continue to escalate, could we see large-scale unrest? Could political violence become a defining feature of American life? Where does this end? Will the country find a way to bridge the gap, or is the divide too deep? Could Trump's policies push states toward greater defiance, even talk of secession? Or is this just the cycle of American politics? Intense division followed by eventual reconciliation. One thing is clear: America is not the united country it claims to be. The only question now is whether it can be stitched back together, or if the divide will only grow deeper. What do you think? Is there still hope for unity, or has America crossed a line it can't come back from? Let's discuss. Democracy at risk? Since his re-election in 2024, Trump's presidency has reignited concerns about the stability of American democracy. His supporters argue that his return represents the will of the people, proof that democracy is functioning as intended. But his critics see it differently. They worry that his policies rhetoric, and aggressive moves against political opponents are eroding democratic norms. So, is American democracy at risk, or is this just another cycle of partisan panic? Acts on institutions and the rule of law. One of the most alarming signs for democracy is Trump's ongoing battle with institutions that were designed to serve as checks and balances. In his first months back, he has already pushed for expanded executive power, replacing officials in key agencies with loyalists and pressuring Congress to give him more control over federal investigations. The Department of Justice, now led by a Trump ally, has reopened cases against political rivals, fueling concerns that law enforcement is being weaponized. Meanwhile, states controlled by Republicans are tightening voting laws even further. Trump has openly supported stricter voter ID laws, eliminating early voting in some states, and even suggesting that mail-in ballots should be abolished entirely. His critics argue that these moves aren't about election security. They're about making it harder for certain groups to vote. Are these measures necessary to protect the integrity of elections, or are they a direct attack on democratic participation? Crackdown on dissent. Protests have erupted in major cities, with civil rights groups sounding the alarm over what they call an authoritarian-style crackdown on dissent. Federal officers have been deployed to suppress demonstrations, and reports of journalists being arrested or harassed are growing. Trump has labeled many protesters domestic terrorists, and his administration is working on stricter laws to punish those who disrupt public order. Historically, democratic backsliding begins when leaders use law and order as justification to silence opposition. Is America heading in that direction, or are these actions necessary to maintain stability? Media and misinformation. The role of the media in a functioning democracy cannot be overstated. But Trump continues his war against what he calls the fake news media, further undermining trust in journalism. He's favoring state-friendly outlets while freezing out critical voices. Independent media organizations claim they're being targeted with regulatory threats. Social media platforms are also under pressure. Some tech CEOs, including Elon Musk, have met with Trump to discuss free speech policies. While conservatives argue that past censorship targeted their views unfairly, others fear that relaxing content moderation will lead to the spread of unchecked misinformation. If the media landscape is being reshaped in favor of those in power, how can citizens stay informed? What comes next? Best case scenario? Institutions push back, Congress upholds its role as a check on executive power, and the 2026 midterms allow voters to correct course if needed. Worst case scenario? Government agencies are fully politicized, dissent is criminalized, and democracy gives way to authoritarian control. Wild card? A major scandal, a Supreme Court ruling, or a Republican split could shift the entire power dynamic. So, what do you think? Is America's democracy strong enough to withstand these challenges? Or are we witnessing the beginning of something much darker? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. Economic uncertainty, boom or bust? One of the biggest promises of Trump's 2024 campaign was to make America wealthy again. He vowed to cut taxes, slash regulations, and bring jobs back to American workers. But now, in early 2025, how's that actually playing out? The first thing Americans noticed? Inflation is still a problem. Gas prices have ticked back up. Grocery bills remain high, and while the stock market saw a brief post-election rally, it's now facing instability as global markets react to Trump's policies. The national debt is still soaring, and while Trump's administration is pushing for aggressive spending cuts, those cuts could impact social programs that millions rely on. Job market realities. Let's talk jobs. Trump's return came with big promises for manufacturing and energy jobs, but tech and corporate layoffs are spreading fast. Silicon Valley has been hit hard as AI replaces more roles, and some companies are hesitating on new investments due to uncertainty over Trump's trade policies. Meanwhile, Trump is doubling down on his America First strategy, pressuring companies to bring factories back home. But will that create new jobs, or will higher production costs just get passed down to consumers? Small businesses, the backbone of the economy, are also feeling the pressure. Interest rates remain high, making it tougher to get loans. And while Trump has rolled back certain regulations, the trade war tensions he's reigniting, particularly with China, could mean higher costs for imports, squeezing both businesses and consumers. The tax debate. Who wins? Trump's tax cuts are back, but the details matter. His administration argues that slashing corporate taxes will lead to job creation and economic growth, but critics say it mainly benefits the wealthy and big businesses. The average American might see a slight tax break, but will it be enough to offset rising costs in other areas, healthcare, rent, education? Meanwhile, federal spending is under the knife. Trump's team is proposing cuts to social programs like Medicaid, housing assistance, and even public education. Supporters argue that reducing government spending is necessary to rein in the deficit. Opponents warn that it could hit lower-income and middle-class Americans the hardest. What's next? Best-case scenario? Trump's deregulation strategy boosts business growth, inflation stabilizes, and the economy strengthens over time. Worst-case scenario? Trade wars, rising interest rates, and budget cuts trigger a recession, leading to job losses and financial instability. The wild card? A global crisis, another pandemic, a major geopolitical conflict, or an AI-driven labor shift reshapes everything overnight. So, where do you stand? Is Trump's economy setting America up for long-term success, or is the nation heading toward financial turmoil? Let us know in the comments. Foreign policy, America first or America alone? Donald Trump's second term has reignited the debate over America's role in the world. Supporters argue that his America First approach is about prioritizing national interests, cutting unnecessary foreign aid, securing better trade deals, and focusing on domestic strength. Critics, however, see it as a dangerous retreat, one that isolates the U.S. and weakens its global leadership. So, what's really happening? Ukraine and Russia, the Trump deal. One of the biggest foreign policy flashpoints is Ukraine. During his campaign, Trump hinted at brokering a deal to end the war within 24 hours. Now, in office, his administration is reportedly pressuring Kyiv to accept a settlement that could involve territorial concessions to Russia. Supporters say it's a pragmatic move. America shouldn't endlessly fund foreign wars, but opponents warn that such a deal signals weakness, emboldening Putin and other authoritarian leaders. And it's not just Ukraine. Trump's stance on NATO is back in question. He's once again threatening to withhold support from allies who don't pay their fair share, reviving fears that America could abandon key commitments. Could this fracture the Western alliance and embolden adversaries like China? China, trade wars, military tensions, and Taiwan. Speaking of China, Trump is back on the offensive. New tariffs are hitting Chinese goods, and his administration is escalating military posturing in the South China Sea. The biggest question? Taiwan. Trump has been vague on whether the U.S. would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. If China sees Trump's America as less committed to international stability, could that increase the risk of conflict? Middle East, unfinished business. Under Trump, the U.S. brokered historic agreements between Israel and Arab nations, but now tensions in the Middle East are rising again. Iran is testing limits, and Trump's renewed push for maximum pressure sanctions is making headlines. Could this escalate into another prolonged conflict, or is Trump simply reasserting U.S. dominance in the region? Global perception, strength or isolation? Trump's second term is forcing the world to rethink its relationship with the U.S. Are allies adapting, or are they looking for alternative leadership, perhaps from the EU or China? Best case scenario? America secures better trade deals and forces allies to take more responsibility for global security. Worst case? The U.S. becomes increasingly isolated, losing influence while rivals grow stronger. So, what do you think? Is Trump making America stronger on the world stage, or is he pushing the country toward isolation? Let's discuss in the comments. The fight over social issues. Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2025 hasn't just reignited political tensions, it's thrown gasoline on the fire of America's culture wars. From immigration to education, gender rights to religious freedoms, the battle lines are clearer than ever. But is this a fight America can afford to keep having? And more importantly, what does it mean for everyday people? Immigration crackdowns, restoring order, or sowing chaos? One of Trump's first major actions after re-entering office was authorizing large-scale deportation sweeps, targeting undocumented immigrants at an unprecedented rate. His administration argues that this is necessary to uphold the law and protect American jobs. Supporters, especially in Republican-led states, say this crackdown is long overdue. But on the other side, critics warn that these policies don't just affect undocumented immigrants, they disrupt entire communities. Industries like agriculture and construction, which rely heavily on immigrant labor, are already feeling the pressure. Families are being separated. Protests in sanctuary cities have intensified. Could this lead to a larger humanitarian crisis, or is it the reset on immigration policy that some Americans have been demanding for years? The education wars, parental rights versus curriculum battles. The fight over education has only escalated in 2025. Trump-backed conservatives are pushing harder for what they call parental rights, banning books, restricting discussions on race and gender, and cracking down on diversity programs in public schools. Many parents and educators argue that these moves amount to censorship, limiting students' access to critical thinking and diverse perspectives. At the same time, liberal states are doubling down on progressive education policies, widening the ideological divide. Some teachers fear for their jobs, caught between opposing political agendas. School boards have become battlegrounds with lawsuits flying left and right. So here's the big question. Should schools reflect the values of the majority, or should they remain neutral spaces for all viewpoints? And with education becoming more politicized, are students the ones who will ultimately pay the price? LGBTQ+ rights and reproductive policies, backlash or regression? Under Trump's leadership, conservative lawmakers are moving aggressively on social policies. Several states have already introduced more restrictions on abortion access, with some even pushing for a federal ban. LGBTQ+ rights are also under fire, with new laws limiting gender-affirming care and restricting discussions of sexual identity in classrooms. To Trump's base, these policies restore what they see as traditional values. To progressives, they represent a rollback of decades of social progress. The Supreme Court, now with an even stronger conservative majority, may be the ultimate deciding factor on many of these issues. But here's the reality. Social policy isn't just about laws. It's about real people's lives. Will these shifts lead to a more stable, morally grounded America? Or will they create an environment of fear and division that history won't look kindly upon? What's next? Will America continue down this path of escalating culture wars, or will there be a moment of reckoning? The next few years will determine whether the country finds a middle ground or deepens its ideological divides. Where do you stand? Are these policy shifts necessary corrections, or are they overreaches that threaten personal freedoms? Drop a comment. Let's talk about it. Will history repeat itself? History's got a loud echo. Big splits, broke times, trust gone. Rome fell, France flipped, we had our Civil War. The 60s were wild, protests, violence, but we pulled through. Now, it's raw again. Trump's first go had riots and rants. January 6 was a taste. This term's kicking off rough. Protests already flaring over his moves. Leaders matter. FDR rallied us, others let it rot. Trump's doubling down. Your job's tied to his bets. Social media's the twist. Your feed's a war zone. Truth's blurry. Best case, we wake up, fix it, your street thrives. Worst, splits widen, fists fly. Maybe worse, your town's a fault line. What if a big shock hits? War crash. Unites us or breaks us. Are we tougher than history thinks, or toast? What's your gut say? Share it. So, what's your call? Will Trump lift your life up or drag us into regret? America's at a fork. Your wallet, your job, your neighborhood's on the line. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Love him or hate him. This is your story too. Like, share, and subscribe for more breakdowns at left, right, and center. Let's keep this real.